the Saatchi Gallery, Charles Saatchi's private museum for showcasing his collection. And we're looking at the work of Martin Maloney, one of his favourite artists. Martin Maloney is quite a good painter to look at if you're interested in the fate of contemporary painting. It's very difficult to think that there's anything new that we could do in painting, and this is a problem which confronts painters over and over again. Everything that they might think of doing seems to have been done already. What we have here is a rather faux naive take on expressionism, and particularly perhaps you might think on German expressionism. Well, when German expressionism was first painted, its unconventional character, its wild painting style, its vivid colours, its barbarism, in a sense, all of this seemed to be a threat and tapping into something deep and painful at the bottom of the human psyche. Maloney recycles all of this in a sense, but in a way which is rather mild, entertaining, kitschy, and ironic. For private collectors like Charles Saatchi, painting remains the preferred artistic medium. It is unique, durable, flat, and supposedly expresses the artist's personality. It behaves as art traditionally should. Yet for some time now, painting has been idling at the terminus of its own exhaustion. Maloney is a sophisticated artist. He's someone who writes rather well and very knowledgeably, and this form of naive, almost primitivist daubing that we are in front of here is a puzzle in certain ways. It is a performance which comes out of an artistic persona that he's invented, in a sense. It's not as if we're meant to entirely take it straight that he is the naive, cack-handed painter that is apparently evident on these canvases. So just like Warhol performed a role and became a brand, there's a similar sort of ambition in Maloney. So there's an oscillation between Maloney's style, which is a declaration of his own self-conscious naivety, and the observation of the scene in front of him. Maloney mostly paints people who are of a lower class than he is. And he's interested in those people, for sure, but one wonders how much the naivety of the painting also reflects on the supposed naivety of these people. When sophisticated painters in the past used to paint shepherds in the countryside, that kind of thing, one of the things that they were doing was saying, sophisticated viewers can look at these simple people and appreciate their simple virtues from the heights of their elite culture and their own sophistication. And so I wonder whether, the very point of having these quite crudely painted things of, the lumpen proletariat in the Saatchi Gallery is part of that same old pastoral charge. Saatchi has remained very loyal to Martin Maloney's work. Like any good marketeer, he wanted to drive the fashion cycle on and to make a new form of art which people could buy into. And he came up with this title, New Neurotic Realism, and there was a show at the Saatchi Gallery. Martin Maloney was one of its exemplars. And of course, if you can have a label that sticks, then this is a fantastic commodity in and of itself. New Neurotic Realism did not, but perhaps it was just somewhat miscast. remember a dealer coming in from Waddington's to talk at Porthold in the 1980s, and he said, "We know exactly who these people are, collectors. There are about 60 of them from Germany, about 200 from America, about 30 from France, and if you think about the people who are spending serious money each year on contemporary art, there's one in the UK. His name's Charles Saatchi." He established a museum in Boundary Road in North London, which was very impressive. In fact, it was one of the most impressive gallery spaces anywhere in London at that time. Certainly it was better than anything that the state had to offer. And there he was showing things which you could not see anywhere else, not just the work of young British artists, but also quite radical and fresh work from the United States and Germany and elsewhere. This young, sometimes punkish, hard-edged, quite controversial art emerges in the 1990s in Britain, and so-called young British art. And there's really only one collector who's buying it in any depth, and that's Charles Saatchi. Now, he had a reputation for buying very expensive blue-chip North American and European art in the past, but he'd sold all of that, possibly because his advertising company was in some financial trouble. But he wanted to carry on collecting, so he started collecting these artists who were young and cheap. You could go in and buy up whole exhibitions. Saatchi liked to label artist tendencies. So young British art was a marketing term in a sense. There was nothing which really unified them aesthetically or anything like that. So he was able to build up a large collection of this kind of art. Now, much of it is now forgotten about and he's disposed of it quietly, but some of those people, Sarah Lucas, Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin and others, have become extremely famous. Saatchi was an unusual collector at that time, and one not much liked by the dealers because he bought and sold all the time. He was as much a dealer as a collector, one might say. There were certain artists who would refuse to be collected by Saatchi because they thought it was too big a risk. He was very unpredictable. He might collect you in bulk, but then, if a few years later he was to dump your works on the market, and there were cases of this, driving down the prices, these could have quite serious consequences for a young artist. So there were risks as well as advantages to being collected by Saatchi. But he did have a definite effect on the sort of work being produced. It became known as Saatchi art for a little while. This is another painter collected by Charles Saatchi, Rafi Kalandrian, who's an artist from Los Angeles. Kalandrian is painting people who are rather like him, bohemian, middle-class folk. People who are very self-consciously composing themselves to be painted and holding themselves a little bit awkwardly. And behind you see both a somewhat idealized but also somewhat threatening Los Angeles landscape. It's idealized because it's much greener than most areas of Los Angeles, and there are very few signs of any kind of social disturbance, although there's a little bit of graffiti on some of the walls behind. At the same time, there's this very strange and threatening sky which is looming up from the background and encroaching on the landscape. If you look at the top panel of the wood paneling, there are swirling shapes in there which are rather like the clouds behind. And so it's placing the clouds and that piece of wood into the same plane. It's making you make that association, which of course makes the encroaching storm, if that's what it is, seem closer, but also does quite a lot to disturb one's idea of what is going on spatially in this painting. And that's a form of dislocation which has been very often used in the history of painting to suggest alienation and discomfort. This is a very skillfully painted work. It's very considered, it's very sophisticated, it seems to have something to say about youthful bohemians in a rather strange urban landscape. But at the same time, and as with the Maloney, these are figures which mostly present themselves as image. There's no real sense here that these are active subjects. They seem powerless before the encroaching storm, just as painting seems exhausted as a medium. If you looked at a Fernand Léger painting of working class men, there was a power there, a very modern and up-to-date form of painting was being applied to that working class. And because they were, in a sense, an expression of working class power, they were perhaps not very comfortable things for the elite to look at. Here, at the time when working class power has pretty much evaporated, what do we see instead? These women seem to present themselves in their dress, with their fashion, as powerless subjects in relationship to the elite, which looks at them and consumes them. Perhaps we shouldn't be too surprised at this, because if one looks at private collectors generally, who are of course generally very rich people, their tastes are quite conservative. Why do they like painting? Well, there are various reasons for this. Firstly, because it's absolutely a unique form of art, an expression of the individual artist's touch and feeling on the canvas, and that's very important. It's durable. Unlike much new media work, we know that it will last for a long time. It's flat. You can hang it on the wall and it won't get in the way, and it can be stored easily. And it is a reliable repository of money. If one thinks about the concept of postmodernism, the idea is that modernism, the story, if you like, of modern art, came to an end. And the ideal was then that we were supposed to be living in a world in which all styles were equally available and artists could freely play with whatever they wanted. With social media and the internet, it's even more true. Everything is available to you as an artist pretty much at once. And so there's a question, well, what do we do with it? Okay, so we can freely play, but it seems to be that many of these references seem to have lost their power. Sure, you can decorate the lives of the bourgeoisie, as the Russian constructivists would put it. In fact, they're decorating the lives of the super rich. They can provide entertaining, light, rather garish paintings with which to decorate their halls and their living rooms. But is this really a serious role for painting to take?